Welcome back to the deep dive. We're here to cut through the noise, give you the clearest insights on the big stories. And today, well, we're plunging into one that's not just hitting headlines now, but it really touches these fundamental questions, about free speech, about power in America. Okay, let's unpack this. August 25th, 2025, this headline drops. President Trump signs a bunch of executive orders. One really grabs attention. It's aimed squarely at prosecuting flag burning. So for this deep dive, we've waded through, well, a lot of sources: NPR, CNN, Reason, The Guardian, you name it, basically, to give you the shortcut, the full picture quickly. Our mission, simple. We're going to unravel what this order actually says, why it's really on a collision course with decades of Supreme Court precedent, and why this specific issue, even now, still sparks this intense debate. This isn't just about a headline. For you listening, it's really about understanding the complexity, sometimes the contradictions, right, of free speech and presidential power.
Yeah, and what's really striking is how immediate and direct this challenge is to the established law. The president's move on the 25th, it specifically tells the Justice Department, go investigate and prosecute flag burning. And like you said, it wasn't just out of the blue. It was part of a package deal signed just before hosting South Korea's President Lee Jae-myung, along with another order on cashless bail.
So, okay, beyond just go investigate, what penalties are we talking about here? What does the order actually propose for people prosecuted under it?
Well, the measures are pretty tough. It talks about a 1-year jail sentence for flag burning, and it explicitly says no opportunity for early release. The idea, I guess, is that this would make it stop immediately.
Wow, okay.
But it doesn't stop with citizens. It specifically singles out foreign nationals. If they burn the flag, they could face really serious consequences. We're talking visas revoked, residency permits, even naturalization getting stopped, or potentially deportation. That adds a whole other layer, legally and internationally.
Right. And the justification. Why such a strong move? What's the president's stated reason for pushing this now?
He's been pretty clear on his reasoning, at least publicly. He said flag burning incites riots at levels that we've never seen before. He claimed, the area goes crazy when it happens. People go crazy both for and against it. And the order's text sort of mirrors that. It calls flag desecration uniquely offensive and provocative, a statement of contempt, hostility, and violence, and argues it may incite violence and riot. He also talked about seeing an epidemic of flag burning everywhere, although it's worth noting several of our sources kind of push back on that, questioning if it's really that widespread.
Yeah, I remember reading that. And this isn't exactly a new stance for him, is it? We've heard him talk about this before.
Oh, definitely not new. You're spot on. This goes way back. Think back to 2016, right after he was first elected. He tweeted or said publicly that maybe people who burn the flag should face loss of citizenship or a year in jail.
Right, I remember that.
So this executive order, nearly a decade later, it basically just puts that exact sentiment into an official directive. It's clearly a long-held view.
So, okay, legally then, how are they planning to actually do this? Attorney General Pam Bondi is involved. What's her office being told?
Yeah, the legal strategy is interesting. It tells the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, to enforce existing laws against flag burning to the fullest extent possible. But, crucially, focusing on harm unrelated to the First Amendment protection. So think property damage, maybe disorderly conduct, that sort of thing. But here's the kicker. It also explicitly aims to clarify the scope of the First Amendment exceptions and basically nudge the Supreme Court to revisit its own precedent.
Ah, okay, so they're trying to find an angle.
It's a deliberate legal strategy,
Yeah.
aiming to maybe chip away at or even overturn that big ruling from '89.
And that ruling is the landmark one, Texas v. Johnson. This is where the order just slams right into established law, right?
Yep.
Can you walk us through that case for anyone who isn't familiar?
Absolutely. You really can't understand this EO without understanding Johnson. So back in 1984, this guy, Gregory Lee Johnson, he burns an American flag. It was outside the Republican National Convention in Dallas, a protest against Reagan's policies, a clear political statement.
Okay.
He gets convicted under a Texas state law, the kind that forbids desecrating venerated objects. Sentence was a year in prison plus a $2,000 fine. But he appealed. He said, look, this is political expression. It's protected by the First Amendment.
And that went all the way up to the Supreme Court in '89. What did they decide?
They did. And the court, in a 5-4 decision, sided with Johnson. They ruled that burning the flag is a form of symbolic speech, and therefore it's protected by the First Amendment. Justice Brennan wrote the majority opinion, and he included that really famous line, if there is a bedrock principle underlying the First Amendment, it is that the government may not prohibit the expression of an idea simply because society finds the idea itself offensive.
Powerful stuff. But what about the whole inciting violence argument? because that seems key to the new executive order's justification. How did the Johnson court handle that?
Yeah, they addressed that head on. That's crucial. They explicitly rejected the idea that flag burning in itself automatically incites violence or counts as fighting words.
Yeah.
The kind of speech that's basically like throwing a punch verbally. Brennan wrote, and this is a direct quote again, "No reasonable onlooker would have regarded Johnson's generalized expression of dissatisfaction as a direct personal insult or an invitation to exchange fisticuffs."
So basically, protesting isn't the same as starting a brawl.
Exactly. They drew a clear line. Political protest, even offensive protest, isn't the same as a direct threat or an immediate call to violence.
Yeah.
And that distinction is absolutely critical for understanding the legal tightrope this new EO is trying to walk.
Okay, but this is where it gets really interesting for a lot of people. Conservative icon Justice Scalia, he was in that 5-4 majority. That must have turned some heads back then.
Oh, it absolutely did. And it's still, a classic example in judicial philosophy. Scalia, famous for his textualism, his originalism.
Right, sticking to the text.
Exactly. He famously put his personal feelings aside entirely. He explained it later, I think it was a 2012 interview. He said something like, "Yes, if I were king, I wouldn't allow flag burning, but we have a First Amendment. Burning the flag is expression. It's saying we dislike the government. It's not urging people to take up arms."
Wow. So even though he personally hated it.
Hated it, but he felt bound by the Constitution's text. For him, it was about adhering to the First Amendment as written, even if he didn't like the outcome. It was about the principle.
That really sends a message, doesn't it? About the Constitution trumping even deeply held personal feelings or popular opinion.
Precisely. And he made that point even more bluntly in 2015, that famous line, "If it were up to me, I would put in jail every sandal-wearing, scruffy-bearded weirdo who burns the American flag. But I am not king."
Huh, yeah, I remember that one.
It just perfectly captures that tension, right? Between personal belief and the judicial duty to uphold the law. Even when it protects speech, you find, well, repugnant. It's fundamental to how the U.S. legal system is supposed to work, protecting unpopular speech.
But it wasn't unanimous. There were dissenters on the court who felt very differently.
That's right. It was 5-4. Chief Justice Rehnquist, joined by White and O'Connor, they dissented strongly. They focused on the flag's unique position as a symbol of our nation. They argued it had a special status, basically, that put it beyond normal free speech rules.
Kind of like its own category.
Sort of, yeah. And Justice Stevens also dissented separately, talking about the flag's intangible dimension, its emotional weight, its history. He felt that made the usual symbolic speech analysis not quite fit. Their arguments really highlight that deep emotional connection many people have to the flag, which explains why this issue just keeps coming back.
So after Johnson in '89 made it clear flag burning is protected speech, did Congress just, accept that? Or did they try to push back?
Oh, they definitely pushed back. Congress reacted fast. In 1990, they passed a federal law, the Flag Protection Act, trying to outlaw flag burning anyway. It had bipartisan support, reflecting that strong public feeling against it.
But wait, didn't the Supreme Court just rule on this?
They did, and the court acted just as quickly. In a different case the very next year, United States v. Eichmann, they struck down Congress's new law. They essentially said, "We meant what we said in Johnson. This is protected speech." It was a really direct showdown between Congress and the court, with the court reaffirming the First Amendment.
Okay, so legislation didn't work. But the debate didn't die, did it? I seem to remember, talk about a constitutional amendment later on.
You do remember correctly. Fast forward to 2006. We're in the middle of the Iraq War. Patriotism is running high. And the Senate gets incredibly close, one vote away from actually proposing a constitutional amendment to ban flag burning.
One vote. Wow.
One single vote. And here's a fascinating bit of history. The deciding vote against it was cast by the then Republican leader, Senator Mitch McConnell. His argument wasn't that flag burning was okay, but that amending the Constitution to restrict speech was the wrong path. He argued for more freedom, not less.
That's quite a moment.
It really was. But even after that close call, the idea hasn't completely vanished. You still hear calls for an amendment today from some politicians, like Senator John Thune. It remains a political talking point.
So it seems like there's this constant tension. The courts say one thing based on the First Amendment, but public opinion often leans the other way. What do the polls actually show?
Yeah, that disconnect is really stark and persistent. Look at a 2021 Knight Foundation Ipsos poll. Only 31% of Americans thought flag burning should be allowed. And just last year, a 2023 YouGo CBS poll found 2/3 of Americans think it should be illegal.
2/3, that's a huge majority against what the law protects.
It is. It tells you just how strong that emotional patriotic attachment to the flag is for most people.
Mm.
It often seems to just, well, override the abstract legal idea of protecting offensive speech.
What does that say, though, about how people see the First Amendment, or maybe just the sheer power of symbols like the flag?
It's complicated, isn't it? Because while people dislike the act, polls also suggest that the appetite for actually amending the Constitution over it has kind of faded over time. So maybe there's a grudging acknowledgement that changing the First Amendment is a really big, potentially dangerous step, even if they personally find flag burning deeply offensive. The flag itself just holds so much meaning, freedom, sacrifice, identity, and for many, burning it feels like a direct attack on those things, regardless of the legal protection for the expression itself.
Okay, so bringing it back to today's executive order, we've got almost 35 years of clear Supreme Court precedent, failed attempts by Congress. How is this order trying to succeed where others failed? What's the angle?
Well, this is where you see the legal maneuvering, trying to find a crack in that precedent. The order doesn't just say prosecute flag burning. It tries to frame it using those exceptions to free speech. It talks about imminent lawless action or fighting words, the very things the Johnson court said didn't apply to flag burning back in '89.
So they're re-arguing a point the court already rejected.
Essentially, yes.
Mm.
They're trying to say maybe the context is different now, or maybe the court got it wrong then. It's a direct challenge to the reasoning of Johnson. Plus, like we mentioned, it directs prosecutors to use other laws, property destruction, if it's someone else's flag, maybe disorderly conduct, local fire codes, things like that. Attorney General Bondi even said they'd act without running afoul of the First Amendment, which suggests they know they can't just prosecute the speech itself directly, so they're looking for these other angles.
And what are the legal experts, the civil liberties folks, saying about this strategy? It sounds legally shaky.
Oh, the reaction was immediate and pretty much unanimous from those circles. Bob Cornrevere from Fire the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression put it very bluntly. He said, President Trump may believe he has the power to revise the First Amendment with the stroke of a pen, but he doesn't. Full stop. He emphasized the government just can't prosecute protected expression, even if the president finds it uniquely offensive.
Right.
And you had others, like Professor G.S. Hans at Cornell Law, calling it a solution in search of a problem, pointing out that there isn't actually this huge epidemic of flag burning happening. So the general expectation, any attempt to enforce this order based on the act of flag burning itself will trigger immediate lawsuits. It's heading straight for the courts.
And the order itself kind of invites that, right? It explicitly says it wants the Supreme Court to take another look. Now, the court is more conservative than in 1989. 3 Trump appointees are on there. Does that change things? Could Johnson actually be overturned?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The court's makeup has changed dramatically. But overturning a major First Amendment precedent like Johnson, that's a really high bar. The principle of stare decisis, letting settled decisions stand, is powerful, especially for fundamental rights cases. There's honestly not much sign that the current conservative justices have shown an appetite for radically shrinking First Amendment protections in this way. And brings us back to that crucial legal test for incitement, the Brandenburg test. Speech is only unprotected if it's intended to produce imminent lawless action, and is likely to do so. The Johnson court said flag burning didn't meet that test. It's hard to see, legally, why it suddenly would now. Reason magazine made an interesting point, too, suggesting the president, given his own experiences around January 6th, ought to understand the difference between offensive speech and actual incitement to imminent violence. The court has been pretty consistent on that high bar.
So this deep dive, it really shows how one symbolic act can just ignite this huge battle over core American values. It really throws into sharp relief how ingrained free speech principles are in the legal system, even when, maybe especially when, they clash with powerful symbols like the flag. It's a tension that just doesn't seem to go away.
Absolutely. And maybe that's the takeaway, right? It forces us to keep asking this fundamental question. In a diverse country like this, where patriotism means different things and protest is a right, how do we balance all that? What does it genuinely mean for speech to be free if it protects things that deeply offend or challenge national symbols? It's clearly a conversation that's not over, and this executive order just brought it right back to the forefront.